Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I am joined here with an author, a personality, just a person who really lights up the Ivory Tower Boiler Room every time she's here. She's a regular. It's her third time in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, so I wouldn't be surprised if she starts to transform into Rapunzel soon, like in the tower. As long as she doesn't get locked up in the tower like Rapunzel. That's actually not a healthy fairy tale. None of the fairy tales are really that
None
healthy.
of them are healthy.
None of
although I
them.
love, although I love them.
Yeah, so I'm joined with the wonderful Elizabeth Winder, who was here to talk about before her book, Marilyn in Manhattan. She recapped the Blonde movie from Netflix with me. And she also has written Sylvia Plath. Well, actually, it's called Pain Party's Work. Sylvia Plath in New York, summer 1953. I know that she's like been in touch with Gail Crowther, who's also been on, who wrote a Sylvia Plath book. So Sylvia Plath, Marilyn Monroe, they are near and dear to my heart and to everyone who listens, probably your hearts as well. Her work has appeared in the Chicago Review, Antioch Review, American Letters, and other publications. She's a graduate of the College of William Mary, earned an MFA in creative writing from George Mason University, lives in very idyllic Washington, D.C. Elizabeth, welcome back to talk about now. We can add parachute women into the repertoire. It's wonderful to have you back.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
So, right away with parachute women, right? We're leaving the 1940s, the 50s. We're like in now the 60s, 70s, even 80s culture. And what I wanted to ask, especially as I've been reading your book, is we have four women: Marianne Faithfull, Marsha Hunt, Bianca Jagger, and Anita Pallenberg. And I'm just curious, before you even started to do this research, because I know you're a deep researcher with your nonfiction, that did you know these women? Did you know their names?
Well, Marianne Faithfull, let's see. I have been aware of Marianne Faithfull since I was a teenager because I knew about her music. I knew about her earlier music starting from the mid 60s when she recorded As Tears Go By. And then I knew about her later career that started in the 80s with Broken English. So she was, and I also knew about her style. She was very beautiful. She just seemed super cool. So I knew who she was. And then and I knew who Bianca Jagger was because I think that a lot of people know who she is. She was so photographed in the 60s, more in the 70s and in the 80s. And then I knew about her humanitarian work. And I first learned about Anita Pallenberg in the summer of 2013. And that's when I really got the idea for this book, was back 10 years ago in the summer of 2013. And I was traveling in the south of France with an ex-boyfriend of mine. And I was reading Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, which is really a very good book, and a long book too. And he writes at length repeatedly about Anita Pallenberg. He writes quite favorably about her. And he's very honest and forthcoming about her really flamboyant intelligence and personality and style. And I just thought, oh my God, she is so cool. And I got the idea right then and there, reading that book. And I were actually in the Camargue region of the south of France, where playing the Rolling Stones in the car, where in that region there are all these French cowboys like running by on their horses. So it had a rock star type of romanticism to it. I just thought, I want to write a book about Marianne Faithfull and Anita Pallenberg, because it was very obvious from Keith Richards' autobiography how great of an influence Anita had on the band. And I thought, nobody else has written about this, so I want to write about it. And the idea was kind of shot down by my agent at the time, who's no longer my agent. And years went by. I wrote Marilyn in Manhattan. And then around 2017, 2018, I thought, you know what? Okay, it's time to revisit this idea. I still think this is a good idea. And then I thought, I want to, like, I started to think maybe Bianca Jagger should be involved in this. She's such an influential personality as well. And in my research, I just kind of, preliminary research, I very quickly learned about Marsha Hunt. And I started listening to Marsha Hunt's music. And Marsha Hunt is, she's a writer and she's written several books. So I started reading her books. And I thought, oh my gosh, I really want to write about her too. So that's how the book came together. It really had been percolating in my mind for quite a while.
Well, and before I sat down with you, I was at the gym doing squats, and of course I had rock and roll playlists, and I decided to do women rock and roll. Like looked it up on Spotify. That's what I love about Spotify. You could like
Yeah.
look up any phrases and they'll come up as a compilation. And it was just so beautiful that the first song was Tina Turner's The Best, which is one of my favorite songs.
Oh, me too.
And I, yeah, and I think like, okay, female rock stars, Tina Turner, that makes sense to me. Joan Jett, with literally rock and roll in the title of her song. Um, that there are such iconic female rock stars. But I feel that even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does had for a while not always turned their attention to the female rock stars.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And Tina Turner, major influence on Mick Jagger. And I actually talk about that in my book a little bit. He was absolutely mesmerized by her presence on stage and the way that she danced.
Well, because she's around the same in like 60s into 70s, right? She
Yes,
starts her
yes.
career
And even
with
in the
Ike.
mid 60s, even 65, 66, she was still already very much a presence.
That's when she was with Ike, I think. In
Yes,
the
yes,
beginning. Yes. And
yes.
then, she found her voice. And that's something for me. I was really listening closely to the lyrics of these songs, like I love rock and roll and, put another dime in the jukebox, baby. Not necessarily that, but even the best with Tina Turner. Something I was finding different when then I listened to some of the Rolling Stones music, which I love, Paint It Black and they're iconic songs, but there was a different theme, and it's coming so clear in your book, Elizabeth, is I find with female rock stars, it's really about individuality and finding their agency and like taking control of their narrative. Where with the men, it's more like the glamour of their lifestyle.
Absolutely. That's a really, really good point. And I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but you're right. Now that I'm sort of thinking about it, you don't really get those reveling in the glamour of the lifestyle songs from women rockers. Not as much. Nothing comes to mind right now. It really is about finding their voice.
Yeah, and even, Heart, I find another like rock band I just am obsessed with.
I love Heart.
Yes, yes. That I think though now, right, we're in 2023 and I was listening to my Sirius channel and Nicki Minaj comes on and she has this new song I just really love. Um, it's left my mind now, but she's always now blending hip hop and rap and pop in a way, like going back and forth with genres. But that's how I feel even Beyonce has gotten into, doing some rock. Dolly Parton now has
Oh
rock
yeah.
music with Miley Cyrus and
Yes.
they're now blending the genres. So I feel when you're looking at your period, when you're looking into the 60s, 70s, women were, like a Joan Jett, she is finding her voice, and there really isn't mixing of genres back then.
No, no, because when you think of when back then, and especially in the 60s, rock was still so new, relatively speaking. So it was being that it was new, people weren't really starting to experiment with it that much. Even into the 70s, they it was still kind of new. and certainly rock stars were new.
Yeah, and I was even thinking with your book, like you're drawing so much on these unknown, the middle class boys who are really trying to find their voice and like what becomes the Rolling Stones. Like even the name of their, I mean, that origin story, the name of their group. Like, what is it about rock and roll and this metaphor of the Rolling Stones? Like, that rock stones, like why
Right.
why this
I
material? I've always
I,
thought about
I
that.
know what you mean, and for me, and I think for many other people, the Rolling Stones are kind of like the the definition of rock and roll. Like certainly you could take issue with that, but when I think of rock and roll, I think of the Rolling Stones. I think of a stone rolling down a hill. I think of all of it gets kind of swirled in my mind. And and I think you can tell from, I mean, to be like, honestly, I wouldn't, obviously I would not have written a book about, and it is about the women, but it also very much is about the Rolling Stones, if I did not like the band, if I did
Mhm.
not like 60s and 70s rock culture, if I did not like that wild over the top glamour of rock and roll, even though I'm criticizing certain aspects of it, I think that you can tell that I am bewitched by it.
Yeah. Well, bewitchment is usually a theme in your work, which I
Yes.
love because I do feel you have a very, and I've never asked you this, but I can tell the more I'm reading your work, Elizabeth, you have such an intuitive way of understanding your characters, right? Realistic characters, but they are
Oh,
still
thank you.
characters. Yeah. And like we all are characters, in my opinion. Like
Yes.
life is a narrative.
Yes.
Um, how I perceive there was some show I was watching and they said like reality is perception. Oh, it was about the definition of reality TV. And I thought it was so wise. Reality is perception, but perception is reality. Like what you
Oh,
see right
wow.
now is reality, but what I'm
Yes.
observing is my reality. So sometimes the two don't meet. Like, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
We don't read the signs the same in our
Right.
lives.
Right.
And
That's
I thought it was just so made sense. Like, there's something in your process that really is just magical. Like, you really are trying to show the full dynamic of each of these four women. Like, what fuels that? Is it you want to really just peel the layer back of who is Marsha Hunt or who is Bianca Jagger?
Oh, definitely. I feel I because well, there's a few different reasons. So for one, I kind of just said this, like I would not write write about someone or something, but in this case, we're talking about people, anyone who I was not fascinated by, because I have to be interested enough to completely want to get to know that person. I think that on some level we write what we want to read. And I don't know if you've ever been reading a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, where you're thinking, this isn't interesting because I don't know enough details. Do you know what I mean? like
Yes,
like
yes.
this, because I feel like that happens to me quite a bit. So I want to be able to be inside someone's head in a way. Um, if I can't get there, I'm not going to write it.
Well, and that's what makes, for me, the most unfiltered or psychologically the depth of the psyche of the writing is that feeling you just described. When you're reading a book and you can tell that the author has censored themselves, or maybe there were right editorial decisions outside the
Right,
author's control, of
right.
course, but you can tell that they really are trying to appease the reader and appease an audience's perspective instead of telling the story they really wanted out there. And
Absolutely. And what's the point of writing, in my opinion, what's the
yeah.
point of writing a book like that? I mean, sadly, so few people read anyway. You might as well make it, you know,
Isn't that the damn truth, Elizabeth?
I wish it weren't the case, but you might as well, and more than that, like that's not the way to do it. That's just not the way to do it. Um, we, we read for entertainment. We read to enter into it, to get to understand. other people, and that way we understand ourselves better. By understanding history, we understand ourselves. By understanding the mind of another, we understand ourselves. And I think that that's part of it too. I wanted to feel like I could enter into the minds of these, not even just the women, but some of the men that I was writing about.
Well, and what differs so much from our conversations about Marilyn Monroe or Sylvia Plath is they are no longer with us. Like a lot of these characters, I keep saying characters, but a lot of these figures are with us, you
Almost all of them
know?
are. Yes. Anita
Yes.
is not.
Okay. So outside of Anita, you're dealing with the lived reality and experiences of people who could talk back if they wanted. Like, it was that
Yes.
something ever that entered into your process? Like, did it impact of how you were writing the narrative, thinking, well, they could pick this book up?
It was certainly present in my mind all the time. I don't know if it really impacted my process in terms of the final product,
Mhm.
but it was in the back of my mind all the time, because how could it not be? I think I was just thinking today, like, oh, I want my next book to take place like in the 1600s or something. Like, it's certainly more nerve-wracking to write about the slightly more recent times. I mean, 60s, 70s, not very recent, but slightly more recent. I think also, well, definitely, this was certainly the most stressful book to write by far, for so many different reasons, and some that didn't have anything to do with the subject matter, most which had nothing to do with the subject matter, which had to do with what was going on in the world, what was going on in my life, many other things. But it was a really stressful book to write, and but that's one of the reasons why I'm proud of how it came out, because I hope that stress, I don't think that stress is visible in the book.
Yeah. Well, and it seems that the years you were writing this book are such transitory moments, especially in American, British, but just global culture, that we're seeing huge transformation of just women, but even just outside of women, those who are on the edge or the margins of society, really gaining their voice in the music industry, in the arts industry, that, you know, this all was
You mean in
a
the last few
tornado.
years, in the last several years?
Yeah, the last several years. And
Yes,
it's a tornado of a process of, I think now when you reflect on this in your book, you can really see that it's not like these are new at all. Um, Cultural shifts happening. Like these arguments have been happening for a while about women gaining more agency over their art. Even like Taylor
yes,
Swift, like Taylor
yes.
Swift being involved legally with like not owning her music, or Kesha. I mean, there's so many women
Britney
artists.
Spears, another
Yes.
one. Yeah.
So how did that process of knowing what's happening now, did that at all surprise you when you saw that these women were dealing with so many struggles themselves, just trying to put their work out there or their art out there?
Yes. Yes. And it continues to surprise me, especially after having written this book and while I was writing the book, because when I read and see these things that are currently happening, I think, how is this still how is this still a, an issue? How is this still going on? Like, of course things are very different, thank God, than they were in the late 60s, early mid 70s. But after, when you've been writing about the things I've been writing about, and so deep in that for several years, it's, you think, my God, then I'm hearing that, it seems like the same thing in the news, and it's the obvious reaction is, how is this still happening? How is this still a thing? You see the ways that things are the same and the ways that they're different, and it's fascinating and also infuriating.
Well, and you show this archetype of women being put into boxes in the 70s with the rock movement and like how the media would even paint women as they had to either fit the groupie narrative, like letting themselves and their bodies be sexualized for this hyper masculine rock culture, or then you had like the wives or the girlfriends who had to excuse the behavior and pretend
Right.
it didn't exist.
The whole
um
stand by your man stuff. Yeah.
yes, but like rarely was the media turning to the female entrepreneur, or like a
Right.
Tina Turner we talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because you know what? It's because the only they weren't interested in it because the media has repeatedly and still in a way continues to use women to feed these sort of like salacious type narratives, or if it isn't a salacious narrative, it's the old like it's a narrative that suits them kind of, and people back then especially, they certainly didn't like a character like Anita Pallenberg, who was absolutely none of these women could have been were ever defined by any of those roles, and that's why they were baffled. The public was very baffled by them, especially by someone like Anita, who was just very much following what made her happy in the moment. And the idea of a woman living like that was so scary and dangerous to the status quo. They just didn't know what to do with it. People
Yeah.
around her didn't know what to do with it.
And it's fascinating because at the same time, and you do dig into this, the women are also like these four women are part of a construction of patriarchal, we could call it if you want to theorize it, but of seeing how their sexualized body is also opening the door for them and how they're going to take advantage of that by doing it as a marketing pitch, almost like what Paris Hilton has done, Kim
Yeah.
Kardashian. I mean, we have very contemporary examples, but it was even like Donna Summer. I remember Donna Summer, right? 70s disco is also at the same parallel line as rock and roll, that Donna Summer said, I was seen as the sex kitten of the discotheque. Like I didn't necessarily agree with it because of religion, but I saw this was my role. Like I'm
Yes.
going to now fill the fantasy. So like, how did these women in your mind, Elizabeth, explore the fantasy of women, but actually their everyday lived experience?
I think, well, to piggyback on what I just said before,
Yeah.
I think that Anita Pallenberg might have been, I don't think that she was, I think that she truly just did what made her happy. And I don't even think there was anything calculated about it. I mean, sure, all of these women were incredibly beautiful just naturally. So she was, and that enabled her to find work as a model, but she was also a very talented actress. And she worked with an actress, not even because she wasn't like Marilyn Monroe, who had this ambition to be a great actress. She just thought it was fun, and then she hung out with the Stones because she thought it was fun. And she was just a very creative person who liked being around, like who liked experimenting with different things. So for Anita, she really just was following her happiness. For Marianne, I think that she got started in her pop folk singing career when she was really quite young, just a teenager. Now it was very obvious, and I think that it was obvious to her at the time that she had a lovely voice, but her beauty was a big reason why she was, able to, that these people sort of like, like talent agents would kind of pick somebody up. And I think that that's one of the reasons why that happened. And she absolutely hated that. So she rebelled very much against it. And I write about this a little bit, she continued to record music a little bit into the beginning of her relationship with Mick. And we're just talking about as early as 1966, 1967 here. By 1968 and 69, she really resented that image of her as this beautiful, angelic, innocent little creature so much that she actively tried to destroy her beauty so that her beauty wouldn't be able to be leveraged in any way. So that is interesting and kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's tragic or not, but she was so used to people using it that she wanted to break it kind of. Then you have Marsha Hunt, who again, well, she's the one American, well, they're all from different countries here, but Marsha Hunt was American and is American, and she was, you know, working as a young model and singer in London. And, you know, I think that she consciously did know that, you know, she could leverage her beauty in some way. But when she landed a role in Hair, she actually was breaking new ground. It was 67 maybe, and the whole like Black is Beautiful movement was going on in the UK and the United States, and wearing her hair in its natural state was, she didn't do that consciously to, you know, make a statement. She just was walking to the audition, and her hair was, which she had just done, it was a really humid day, it was just like, you know, what your hair does in humidity. And she just kind of showed up, was like, well, here I am, what am I going to do? And the directors thought, oh my gosh, this is great. So when the musical came out, they were the publicity agents really zeroed in on her, because she was offering up a very new and unusual look. And then that sort of opened other doors. And then Bianca Jagger, I think, was, I mean, honestly, she is, out of all of these four women, and this is, you could have probably guessed this, she is the one who was definitely the most elusive to me. I know that she absolutely loved clothes, probably still does, because when you look at pictures of her, she still looks incredible and is dressed impeccably. But I don't, you know, she was someone who, at least during the time that I was writing about, was not really interested that much in, you know, a career in performing or the arts or anything like that, although she was interested in writing a book on nutrition and cooking. She was interested in things like that, actually. So yes, she is quite elusive to me. Does that kind of answer the question at all? I know
Yeah,
it's kind of a long-winded answer.
no, of course. I feel that, you know, even ourselves never know how much we're actually living our lives under societal expectations, right? I think all of us are, whether we want to or not, are still conforming to certain ideals and
Oh, right.
sometimes subverting
Or
that
we're
for,
making big decisions to rebel against them. You know,
yes.
I think often in my life, like, I mean, I'm sure not the only one who's done this, but having done really things like acting out of character from specifically to rebel against expectations, kind of. You know, so it can go both ways.
Yes. And like knowing that society is, there's going to be critics and there's going to be those who see that you are abandoning what they see as security and the status quo. And I mean, I feel that way too, Elizabeth, of just having created this we could call it a small business enterprise, but having this organization now that, you know, even myself having such steamy, risque conversations and really being so sex positive. At the same time, there have been those who said, you know, Andrew, this is going to really, this might affect you going to a university again or someone hiring you. Um, like even if you post photos of yourself and your body, you know, they could use it against you. And I said, I have to do what feels so authentically myself, and I feel empowered with my journey that, you know, if someone wants to judge my decisions and my conversations and who gets to be part of this community, that's their loss. But that's something I
Exactly.
now have come to terms with. But it doesn't,
I think that's
like you,
something you and I have in common, you know, like I think that we're both very much like that. And I think we also sense like it would be so for me at least, and I think probably for you, it would be
Mhm.
so uh, way more extreme than uncomfortable, so unbearable to have to not be yourself, that we would not want to be in any environment where, whether it's, an employer or this or that, where we couldn't be our true selves, right?
Exactly.
That, I mean, that's almost like not an option. But a lot of people still operate that way and live their lives that way, even in 2023.
I think it really breeds resentment and anger, but I'm not a psychologist. That's not what my PhD is in. It's in English, but I do really think you can tell the people who felt they had to conform and that's really not their true self. It's sad.
It's
But
very sad.
it is. And I think though, with what you do with the account of these women is you already brought it up with Marsha Hunt, who they really are so unique. And I don't want to like use unique just as a trite way of saying, oh, they were just special, women at their time. I really do think though, what they're doing with the Rolling Stones, especially like with Mick Jagger, is really trying to find their artistic freedom or expression, or even just live their lives 100% who they are. And it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy now, even, but back then, there was just such a different understanding of, okay, well, women can be artistic, but the box is like this, or they can
Yes.
be in the 70s, a sexual powerhouse. Like that's okay. Like if they're at the disco or they're doing this type of work, it has to be though at the gaze of a
These
man.
prescribed, like, are you going to check this box, check this box, check that box? And um, one thing to keep in mind is things were like, time was the times were changing so rapidly. And my book does cover, let's say 10 years time, 1965 to 75 was sort of the time that my book covers. Between those 10 years, it was like, I mean, culture had shifted quite a lot. Things were changing very rapidly. I mean, in terms of sexism, it was still pretty bad in 1975. But that, that the second wave feminist movement had happened in between those 2 years, right? Other things had happened in between those or 10 years, sorry. So really things had really shifted quite a bit. That's the 60s and early 70s is a time where things were just changing at lightning speed.
Yeah,
So
reproductive rights, right?
yes,
You have the
absolutely.
introduction of the pill.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. And I realize that times move faster because of technology, but there was something much bigger than technology that was going on here. That's one of the reasons why the 60s have always fascinated me so much. I love the history of fashion. It's one of my favorite things to read about. It's one of my favorite things to write about. There are a lot of clothes in this. There's a lot of clothes in every book that I've written. I think Marilyn probably has the least amount of clothes. But even if you look at like 1965 to 1967, even 2 years, the fashions were so different. 1967, 1969, 2 years again. It doesn't move like that now. And I don't think it ever will again. It hasn't before, it hasn't since. So there was something going on then, obviously.
well, and a shift in consciousness, right? I
Yes,
mean, that was the second
yes,
wave feminist call with the feminine mystique, Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem,
absolutely.
even Alice Walker, like
Yes,
that we're going to shift our thinking and live our lives without feeling those constraints. And I think
absolutely. And that's
you
and
see,
that's
yeah,
with these four women, that's what the probably one of the main things that they had in common, all in their very, very different ways. To talk about Marsha Hunt again, she is somebody who was, out of all four of the women, certainly by far the most interested in a on the on a larger level, what is happening in society? Let's create new ways of living. Sure, she was interested to live in a way that she wanted to live on her own individual way, but she is somebody who was very interested in what's happening at the society level too. Maybe as a Black woman, that she was more tuned into what is happening at a society level. Maybe that was part of it for her. I think Bianca is somebody who was a little more tuned into that as well. Anita Pallenberg, again, very much just like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I mean that in a way that I, in a very positive way. She's probably my favorite out of everybody in the book. The one who, for better or worse, I kind of wish I was more like. I just love her. I loved writing about her. I wish I knew her. She's someone who I am mesmerized by, if you can't tell.
Yeah, well, and that was something is, again, I know that what's beautiful is you hear so many responses from your readers, but I'm sure you had to think, what if one of these women picked my book up? Like, did that ever, has there been, I mean, your book's only been out a few months, but is that a hope that one of them,
Yes.
it
I mean, of
comes
course,
across their desk?
it's not possible for Anita to pick my
Mhm.
book up, at least not on this earth or this
Yeah.
realm. But I've gotten a positive response from Marsha Hunt, so that was like wonderful. It is amazing to get a positive response. I hope that Marianne Faithfull reads my book. I have quoted at length from her memoir. Marianne Faithfull, as you can tell from my book, is an amazing writer. Like
Mhm.
she is just, she's the kind of writer that I hope that I am, or that I hope that I get to be one day. The way that she's got an amazing imagination, and I think that one of the reasons why Marianne's a great writer is because she's such a great reader. She lives and breathes poetry and literature. So anyway, different. That's a bit of a tangent, but I do hope she picks up my book at some point.
Yeah. Well, and I think I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask about the men, which is they're all so complicated. Like, just because they're men doesn't mean they're not layered and nuanced, and
Right.
everyone is layered.
And I hope that comes across
Yes.
the book.
Well, and that's something I think is so wonderful in what you do is when you're dealing with a group, like not even just the Rolling Stones, but a group of women and interconnected lives. I feel I gravitate more towards these books than ones where it's just um the solo music um
Right.
guest, or
Right.
like just a Mick Jagger. Nothing against anyone who, I think they're wonderful books, but I find that sometimes when you're just writing a biography of, say, Mick Jagger, it's going to be you're trying to paint a certain picture and
Right.
can't dig into all of the interconnectedness of his life with these conversations, the just people who entered their lives. And I think it must have been so fun thinking about how these women interacted with especially Mick Jagger or,
Oh, it was so much fun. I've always been interested in, like, kind of like, I've always thought what band dynamics are interesting to me, like rock band dynamics have always been interesting to me. And the Rolling Stones, the dynamics, the relationships that in that band, I mean, incredible. Like that is something that it was always shifting. It was, and like I said in the very beginning, I think of my book, women get unfairly labeled as like gossipy and bitchy and not nice to each other, but the which is of course no gender has that cornered, but the Rolling Stones were like, I have never seen or I mean read or heard more like the they were so awful to each other, and that now we're friends, now you're not friends, like constantly ganging up on each other, and like this and that, and it was and jealous of each other and angry with each other, and it was it was crazy, particularly in the earlier days of the band. And that was pretty wild to learn about it and to write about. And of course it has an impact on the creativity, and it's incredible that they've stayed together for so long, knowing that. But that was really interesting to read and write about. And naturally, Anita Pallenberg and Marianne Faithfull, out of the four women, were the two who were connected. They spent time together, a lot of time together, and they had a very, very close friendship that a friendship that lasted for decades, because long after Anita was involved with Keith for 13 years. So Marianne's relationship with Mick was over much sooner. But long after either of them were involved with the Stones, they stayed close through the 80s, through the 90s, through the aughts, until Anita's death in 2017. And Marianne wrote a wonderful song in tribute to her, one of her albums. So their relationship was really fascinating. And one of the things that I really love about what happened was, Anita did probably sleep with Mick during the filming of Performance, and while Marianne was still with him, but they were able to get past that and get over that very, very quickly. Their friendship really was that strong.
Yeah. So, for my last question, Elizabeth, is just what do you really hope readers are taking away or just thinking about these dynamics? Like you've opened up right now about how um volatile, but also how empowered the Rolling Stones just as a band and a presence were. Like it was a back and forth. Like this wasn't just they were always all positive and all living in peace. There was, of course, the obstacles. So, what does a reader really gain from looking at all of these perspectives, and especially the gender, the sex politics that is at the heart of these four women and their journey with the Rolling Stones?
I think that one of the biggest things here is the tremendous influence that these women, particularly Anita and Marianne, because they were there in the relatively early, had on the Stones' music and their success. Mm-hmm. Not because so much of the Stones is their style, right? I love the music. I'm the biggest fan of the music, but the style is such a big part of it. And that real pirate style of rock and roll was so new at the time. The Stones pioneered that. But what was really happening is that was Anita's influence. That was Marianne's influence. And since rock culture was so new, the tremendous influence that these women had on rock culture, on how the rock culture as we know it today, what we think of how rock culture has been for so long, is sort of because of these women. So that's one big thing. And then I think another thing is just how much, like, how tough these women were just to just to withstand all of this, and the bravery that they had just to live, to really be true to themselves in such difficult, tumultuous times. It's inspiring, really. I mean, to use a cliched word, it's inspiring. It's inspiring to me, and I hope it is to the readers as well.
Well, it is very inspiring, and I can't wait for the book club to discuss Parachute Women. So Elizabeth, I know, is going to answer the book club members' questions. So I'll add, her responses after this section of the interview. So Elizabeth, it's been wonderful having you back. everyone, please look at the show notes. I have a link to both the book and the audiobook. There's an audiobook too of Parachute Women by Elizabeth Winder. Um, I loved our conversation, Elizabeth. You are welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room anytime.
Thank you.
Um,
It was great being here.
yes. Okay. Well, thanks to all the listeners out there. And thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can't wait to talk to you again and see what you're, brewing, to use the bewitching
Yeah.
metaphor. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Bye.